This broadcast with breaking news out of the Georgia RICO case against Trump and his aides. Guilty. For the first time ever, we're reporting tonight, a Trump lawyer in the 2020 election case has now pled guilty. Sidney Powell, who you may remember from presentations like that one that she gave with Giuliani after the election, a key coup lawyer. A key player, we should mention, Jack Smith's federal case against Trump, and most critically tonight, a RICO defendant in that Georgia case where she was memorably booked for her mugshot. She was awaiting trial next week. The news tonight, well, she just pled guilty today, a bid to duck potentially harsher penalties in that criminal case. Unlike the federal case, today the cameras were rolling in the Georgia courtroom. You can see the defendant, now convict, sitting there. This is where a one-time presidential level lawyer became a convict. She turned herself in. She admitted her guilt in breaking the law in the efforts to overturn Trump's laws. And like any other defendant, she conceded it all under questioning by the judge.
Are you pleading guilty today because you agree that there is a sufficient factual basis, that there are enough facts that support this plea of guilty?
I do.
That is a huge breakthrough in the RICO case against Trump. It's driving major headlines today about this lawyer, Powell, pleading and flipping on Trump, which strengthens the RICO prosecutor's case at this pivotal time. A time where, I should note, news outlets are reporting on this as a major story, even amidst everything happening in America and around the world. Reports of escalation and the possible looming invasion in the Israel-Hamas war. NBC's Richard Engel will report the latest on that. He is live from Jerusalem as part of our coverage later this same hour. And there is still a speakerless House to deal with, quite rudderless, unclear when Jim Jordan may get what he now requests, which is another chance for another vote that many of his fellow Republicans say they will ensure he loses. So that is also going on. And I say that both as a general factual matter and a sign that amidst even those big stories, this first guilty plea by a Trump aide in the coup case is big news, hugely significant, and that is for several reasons. I'm going to walk through a few of them with you right now. The first is the most obvious. Sidney Powell is flipping on Trump. She says she will testify against him. I repeat, Powell is flipping. A lawyer who worked directly with Trump in efforts that led up to the failed coup and insurrection admits today for the first time in court that she broke the law. If you have to debate somebody about this and say, what did they do and who said that? She said that. She's a Trump lawyer. She stood there with Giuliani. She made all these claims. She tried to steal your vote. And according to who? Today I can tell you, according to her. She admits that under oath. She pleads guilty. She says she will truthfully testify now about all of it, including against potentially co-defendant Trump. But now we're going to show you tonight what it looks like and sounds like when that happens in court. Because Powell, who spent her career as an attorney in courtrooms, left one today as a convict. She struck the plea deal. She said under oath she will testify against, quote, all defendants, which includes the most infamous defendant there, Donald Trump. Now, we're going to show you now, so you can see for yourself, that moment as it occurred in the courtroom. The Georgia courtroom provides one sort of broad, wide view shot. So we have highlighted the exact table position where you can see Powell, and you will see and hear her providing her plea and discussing testimony.
You understand that the state is asking that you truthfully testify at all hearings and proceedings and trials involving the co-defendants in this matter, and that you have no communication with co-defendants, media, or witnesses until this case has been completely closed against all defendants.
I do.
I do. Those are some of the scariest words defendant Trump has probably heard in this whole long saga of a legal process. Why? Well, defendant Trump knows what he told her to do. He knows what she witnessed and observed. And he knows that in the RICO indictment, prosecutors used evidence of Powell, who is now saying she will tell all truthfully, plotting with defendant Trump and the now convicted schemes, including tampering with voting machines. Trump can also see dominoes are starting to fall. Powell is the second RICO co-defendant to plead guilty. And the other, Scott Hall, we should mention, did not actually have any contact with Trump. So however that plays out in the legal process, that's not a person who could flip on him. He doesn't have personal knowledge of what Trump might have said behind the scenes. Powell is the first to vow to testify about what Trump did. So that scares Trump. Another reason this is important tonight, the reason why I showed you it's making all those headlines, it also shows the narrowing path for some of Trump's RICO co-defendants. Powell is the first person to spend time with Trump to flip. And the prosecutors are rewarding that. Again, just going through the facts, let me show you how. Powell got a deal because she pled. And so she has pled to breaking a single law today, interfering with election duties, across 6 counts. She will get probation and a fine. Now I'm going to show you what she actually faced, because she was indicted on RICO and larger crimes. So today we can show you she cops to 1 misdemeanor, which is bad. You see that in red. It hurts her position in other pending cases. We have more on that later. But she pleads guilty only to election interference and gets out of this with no jail time or any felony conviction. Now, I want to show you, leaving this on the screen, what she faced in those original charges. It was RICO, multiple counts of fraud, multiple computer crimes, defrauding Georgia's elections. This is a good deal for her by any estimation. And Nick Ackerman and Maya Wiley are here. We're going to get into that in a minute. I also want to tell you from the other side of the table what Trump's lawyers are saying about this today. Quote, assuming truthful testimony in the case, referring obliquely to Powell, quote, it will be favorable to the overall defense strategy, says Trump's Georgia defense lawyer. So Powell was facing, as I just showed you, a lot more than 1 misdemeanor that she pled to. And that was going to be at next week's trial, which is still scheduled, except now it has 1 less co-defendant. She pleads out. Mr. Chesbrough, whose mugshot you also see on the screen, he is now facing a tougher case with testimony presumably against him. So this is the first split we've actually seen on Trump's team. The other lawyer, Chesbrough, goes on trial next week facing more pressure and potential jail time. And if Powell's testimony works against him, let me be clear, he is presumed innocent, and he will get to make his defense in whatever way he chooses. But if this testimony that she provides, along with that other now convict, Hall, works against Chesbrough, if he's convicted and he faces what she doesn't, jail time, well, that is going to focus the minds of a lot of other Trump co-defendants. You can bet people like, say, Mark Meadows, a Trump RICO co-defendant, are watching this all very closely tonight. And if several people start flipping, you don't want to be the last one. And that brings me to another point I want to share with you as we kind of take this in. There's a lot of talk about Trump's aides, like Powell, being unhinged, quote unquote, or whether Donald Trump is confused or delusional or really knows he's lying. So let me point something else out. Notice how Ms. Powell, after all of her bizarre claims and alleged defamation, today I'm about to show you, struck a pretty rational, self-interested deal. And when her liberty's on the line, she cooperated today with the prosecutors and the judge. She tried to sound sort of straightforward, even cordial, if you want to call it that, as she took on the mantle and spot as the first Trump lawyer and defendant to flip. And throughout that, I'm going to show you right now, she also had to answer the usual questions that the judge states about you knowingly making this choice to plead guilty, her age, her mental state.
Do you swear or affirm the testimony you shall give in this matter currently before the court shall be the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Can you please state your true and correct legal name?
Sydney Catherine Powell.
And are you the Sydney Catherine Powell named in accusation 23 SC 190370?
I am.
And are you currently taking any medication or under the influence of any drugs or alcohol at this time?
No, I'm not.
How old are you, ma'am?
Oh, gosh. 68, despite my astonishingly youthful countenance.
Got it. And what is the highest level of education that you have completed?
I have a Juris Doctorate degree.
Are you able to read, write, and understand the English language?
Yes.
Yes, yes, and yes, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, and the reference there to that Juris Doctorate degree, which is also in doubt tonight. Nothing but the truth. That is what is required of you in a court of law. That's why the things that you say or lie about outside of court become crimes in court. Nothing but the truth is what ultimately is required if you say that you will be cooperating. Nothing but the truth about everything you did and everything your client did, with some possible exceptions regarding legally acknowledged privilege, but not if it were a crime. So nothing but the truth. Who does the truth scare tonight? And why is Sidney Powell deciding at this late date, we're literally days out from her criminal trial, to cooperate? And does that mean more people will? Are we witnessing a legal breakthrough in one of the most important, significant racketeering cases against a former president who's currently running for president? We take those questions to what we believe is the right panel of experts. Nick Ackerman was a prosecutor in Watergate and SDNY, highly experienced on these complex cases. Maya Wiley, a former civil prosecutor with the Southern District of New York and a civil rights expert, among other things. Welcome to both of you. Try to really walk through so people could see how it looked and felt in court today. Is this a big legal development? What does it say about the DA's RICO case?
Oh, it's a very big legal development, Ari, as you know. And let's just name the reasons why. One, it is because every prosecution, every prosecutor, especially with the conspiracy charges, is bringing them hoping that someone will say, I'd rather drop the dime than do the time. And that's exactly what Sidney Powell said. She looked at a case. It tells us she looked at the case and said, I'm going down. So rather than go down hard, I'm going to go down soft and take some people with me. And the second is that the district attorney would not have made the deal if the district attorney did not see Sidney Powell's testimony that she could offer as helpful to her, and we should presume in her RICO charge case, because even though she did not plead on the racketeering charges, what she pled on, as you point out in your opening, are misdemeanors related to intentionally, that's the one word I wish I had seen up on that board you shared, intentionally interfering with the election, intentionally in Coffee County, Georgia. But that does link to the RICO case, right? That there is intentional interference in order to deliver to Donald Trump a victory. And she is a person who was, and I'll switch to Hamilton now, was in a room where it happened, presumably, on December 18th, inside the White House, with Rudy Giuliani, also a co-conspirator, someone charged with co-conspiracy, federally as well as in Georgia. So presumably, she has a lot to offer, and she made a wise choice for herself. And we have to assume that other co-defendants are now going to think seriously about whether they want to get in early or fall hard later.
You lay it all out very clearly. Room where it happened, indeed, which is why Trump would know what she has on him. And he keeps track of that kind of stuff. Nick has always been a little bit more Les Mis than Hamilton, but I don't want to put you in a box. I don't want to put you in a box.
I kind of go with both.
Okay, you like both. Equal opportunity. Broadway, it's not that far from where we're sitting. On that point, I want to bring in Nick, because you have sat with these kind of deals, including in complex political cases.
Sure.
Watergate was, like Georgia, a case about, among other things, cheating in politics and the abuse of government power to potentially cheat in elections.
Absolutely.
Chesbrough is still up as the Trump lawyer on trial next week. I want to show you, Nick, as a prelude to your breakdown, which we've asked you to walk us through. He was offered a deal, sources say. Quote, the deal would have allowed him to avoid prison time by pleading guilty to, it would have been a felony count on racketeering, which tells you what they think he's up for, a little more serious. That's a top charge. He would have had to agree to testify, as she did today, including Trump, and got 3 years probation and a $10,000 fine. That's a pretty good deal compared to what he's facing. As of tonight, I can say he hasn't gone to court and taken it. He hasn't publicly affirmed anything like that. The sourcing is, so far, he said no. Tonight's news, I want to be clear, could change that. But that's what he rejected. Let me show again the same breakdown we had up for you to walk us through. We're going to put this up. Walk us through what she faced and what she did.
Well, what she did is she basically avoided having to be convicted on a RICO count that carries with it 20 years in prison, a minimum of a 5-year sentence. She also got away without having to deal with other felony counts, which would have definitely been jail time as well.
So the left is, in your view, you get convicted on that, she goes to jail no matter her age, first-time offender.
Absolutely. Yeah. She was in deep trouble here. I mean, there was no way that she could sit there and take the risk that she would be going down. The problem is that there are documents that incriminated her. There were other witnesses who incriminated her. The most recent person who pled guilty knows what her role is. The people from there was forensic firm that she had hired to actually go in there and take the stolen data from the elections in Georgia.
And so the deals get better or worse as time goes on for the others?
Well, much worse. As I used to say to defendants, the train is leaving the station. And it's time to get on, because if you don't get on now, it gets a lot worse for you.
All right, let's take that point to the other big co-defendant here. So our panel stays, but our other breakdown is, keep in mind, this Georgia indictment mentions the December 18th meeting, which one of you referenced, the White House meeting with Giuliani and others, where there was a discussion about seizing voting equipment and then appointing Powell, now a convict, having pled guilty to a misdemeanor today, as a special counsel. Powell also testifying to the January 6th committee about that very meeting.
Did you believe that it was going to work, that you were going to be able to get to see the president without an appointment?
I had no idea.
In fact, you did get to see the president without an appointment.
We did.
How much time did you have alone with the president? And I say alone, you had other people with you, but
Right.
from his aides before the crowd came running.
Probably no more than 10 or 15 minutes.
Was in that...
I bet Pat Cipollone set a new land speed record.
Also, you're reminded she has this style, a certain style, the way she talks and fits in her, what she considers her witticisms. But that was her providing a type of testimony. This type is different. It's much more grave for the other co-defendants. Walk us through, as a prosecutor, how you see her now. We showed, she said in her oath today, I'll testify truthfully about everyone.
Right.
How does that specifically affect RICO defendant Trump?
Oh, it affects him big time. She had direct meetings with him. She was there on December 18th, 2020. She had conversations with him. She had conversations with Michael Flynn, who was also present. I mean, the whole point of this was they wanted to seize government, all of the voting machines in the battleground states. And when they finally were told they couldn't do it, they went out and did it the old-fashioned way. They stole it. So they started in Coffee County.
Let me slow you down, because you're talking the way a prosecutor makes the story make sense, right? One random thing over here, okay, you try it, you get through it, life goes on, right? There is crime, sadly, in many places. You're saying this wasn't just Coffee County. You're saying there's a line to the coup plots hatched in the White House, including trying to abuse military power, which they failed at,
right?
To what they went ahead and did. And you're saying you would be asking her on the stand, how does this relate to Trump's goal? Because Trump was meeting with people trying to what? Abuse power to steal?
To overturn the election.
Yeah.
Basically to overturn the election. That's what she was doing. She was doing that with Rudy Giuliani. They were lying about the election being stolen. She appeared with him at various press conferences. She knows about General Flynn and what he was up to. They spent time at some farm in South Carolina working on this stuff. She may know about lots of other people. And in fact, if I were her attorney, I'd be making a call to Jack Smith and trying to work out a deal for the case in the District of Columbia.
Where we mentioned, but I want to remind viewers, because there's a lot going on, she is listed as an unindicted co-conspirator there.
Co-conspirator 3.
You are going to get the last word in this segment. I will tell folks we have actually a lot more coming up, including I have a legal breakdown after our 1-minute break. You're going to get the last word in this segment, but do you know who gets the second to last word? Vintage Powell. Not today's cooperative Powell, who's striking a different note and talking about the truth. But the, I will say, legally, allegedly defamatory, and I will say non-legally, clearly lying 2020 Powell. This is her on the voting machines. Take a look.
Other software in the source code that does the alterations is embedded, we have been told, in the source code all across the country in all the voting machines. There's no doubt it has been used to alter elections in other countries. We know specifically that Venezuela exported it for that purpose to Argentina and other Latin American companies.
Now, for viewers, there actually is doubt. It's actually false. The conspiracy theory that the Venezuelan data came in, as we say around here, yada, yada, yada. But I give you the last word on the difference between then and now. And in fairness to the defendants, the argument the defense lawyer might make to a jury, which is not a totally wild one, which is she says her piece now, she has her history, and the defense lawyer says, what, she's our authority now?
Well, a defense lawyer says she's our authority now, but all of that lying she was doing was for the very purpose she has been charged with in Georgia, which is to help Donald Trump steal an election. So a defense attorney can argue that, but you certainly have lots of reasons why, and there's always the case whenever you have someone flip in a conspiracy case, is that's what the defense will use. But in this case, what benefit to her? She's in fact it's staying out of prison because she's going to be convicted, and to Nick's point, because there's evidence. But the really important point here is in that very case, when she's talking about the voting machines and data, she herself in her own defense said, well, no reasonable person would believe me when I told those tales. That was her defense. That's pre this. We also know, and look, this is the power of the prosecution, is the incentives now for other people to talk, but also because there are documents, because there are other witnesses, because there are going to be different things to point to. The bottom line here is she made a good deal for herself, and that's bad for Donald Trump.
I mean, you guys really, anyone listening is saying, gosh, this is a different level. And as we noted historically, it's the first Trump lawyer to flip on any of the coup charges, but it's a different level. And it's interesting that it came out of Georgia. Jack Smith has been very effective. He won a partial gag order. He has the earlier trial. He's moving with all deliberate speed. I was down there one of the last hearings watching him in court. He's no nonsense. I didn't see him do any. I mean, I saw no dint of human emotion. If we found out later that he was an AI prosecutor formula, you'd be like, well, yeah, he looks like a prosecutor and nothing else. Having said that, we are seeing, and I think it's worth noting here as we track these cases, an incredible breakthrough by this DA Willis in Georgia that no other prosecutor, including Smith, has reached yet, this level of flipping. So it's really striking. As Nick reminded us and you alluded to, this same person is, of course, unindicted in D.C. and may have later problems there. So I thank both of you. Let me tell everyone what's coming up. We have our shortest break, 1 minute. We're back with a breakthrough in the Georgia RICO case where Sidney Powell has pled guilty of an election crime in court today. DA Willis charged her and 18 other co-defendants. You see 2 now guilty on the screen there. This is a racketeering indictment of the multi-pronged plot to steal the election. We've shown you many aspects of this. When we first showed you these arrows, none of them were red. They were all basically what the plots were. Some of them were indicted. The news tonight, Powell is now convicted of an election crime, with the indictment detailing the breaching of voting machines. So we make, on this chart, indicted is yellow because we will see what happens. And some of these things were not indicted, like the military plot, which Powell actually sat in on, but didn't get far enough where we've seen that itself indicted. But if you look at the bottom of your screen, again, updated for the first time, we have the voting data breach convicted. That involves a secret effort, which was then exposed, to try to tamper with voting machinery in Georgia. Now, there's surveillance footage, you may recall, that showed a local Republican official and Trump operatives copying information and material from voting machines. And Sidney Powell left receipts because there was an actual written plan, a contract that Georgia prosecutors used as evidence, which they said showed the purpose of willfully tampering with electronic ballot markers and tabulating machines in that same county in Georgia. Now, even one day after the January 6th insurrection itself, the indictment shows Powell using a computer with the ongoing plot, so post-insurrection. And prosecutors said they had her, and the evidence they said they could prove of an intention to continue to tamper with, in this case, remove voter data. Now, tonight we showed you this brand new video from the court today where Powell pled guilty. She's a witness. But beyond that, she has now sworn today for the first time under oath that she will testify against the remaining co-defendants. She's the upper right there. She's at the top because those people at the top, as you look at them, those are all lawyers. Most of them Trump's actual lawyers, one of them a DOJ lawyer. She's on the upper right as a Trump lawyer who is now guilty. And this is what she said today about testifying against all defendants, including Trump.
You understand that the state is asking that you truthfully testify at all hearings and proceedings and trials involving the co-defendants in this matter, and that you have no communication with co-defendants, media, or witnesses until this case has been completely closed against all defendants.
I do.
I do. I told you at the top of the broadcast, that was the most significant part. And if you have been through many of these legal sagas, and the former president has certainly catalyzed and sparked far more court cases and legal sagas than any other president in American history, then you may recall that sometimes people will plead and not cooperate. You may recall in the Mueller probe, there were people who were tied to all sorts of things, and they tried to strike deals, but they didn't always say those words, I do, and I will testify. And that's why tonight is a sudden and significant change, and one being noticed certainly by Jack Smith's investigators, certainly by everyone following these cases, certainly as everyone gears up for a criminal trial that as of now is still scheduled to begin next week against Cheeseborough. So what kind of witness will this now flipped convict, Sidney Powell, be? Well, we have a little bit of a set of clues. I talked a little bit before about how there's vintage kind of old school Powell, and there's the more cooperative Powell now. This is the most cooperative she's ever been under duress. We also know how she sounded when she did provide testimony, which is different, of course, than some Trump aides who took that fight all the way to court, Ann and Navarro. She did provide testimony in the Jan 6 House probe.
He asked Pat Cipollone if he had the authority to name me special counsel, and he said yes. And then he asked him if he had the authority to give me whatever security clearance I needed, and Pat Cipollone said yes. Cipollone and or Hirschman and whoever the other young man was said, you can name her whatever you want to name her, and no one's going to pay any attention to it.
Now, that's one lawyer describing what another lawyer said, and best we understand it, and the committee spoke to this, much of what she said about those details they found useful. They found it reasonably credible. The question then becomes, will she be forthcoming, and will this be the same type of Powell when prosecutors want to pin down more details on Trump? Because remember, there's what happened, and there's also why it happened. Did you do the bad thing, and why did you do the bad thing? And to prove a case against anyone, and especially a former president, where juries might give an extra amount of deference as a human matter, they're not legally supposed to, but let's live in the real world, it's very important for prosecutors to prove that why. And we've heard in many cases Trump and his lawyers, when he is caught really pinned down on the bad thing, whatever it might be, whatever case, say, well, even if the bad thing went down, that wasn't his criminal intent. He was just relying on the advice of counsel.
What he's being indicted for ultimately is following legal advice from an esteemed scholar, John Eastman. Everything that Mr. Trump requested to be done was done with the advice of counsel, was done with lawyers giving him advice. You're entitled to believe and trust advice of counsel.
That is a current Trump lawyer, I should mention, who has been involved in the defense in the Jack Smith case, both the classified docs case and the coup case there. So he's also been poring over documents that involve Powell. And you heard the defense there. Powell's a Trump attorney. Her pleading right now and basically saying she will cooperate and that there were crimes undercuts that advice of counsel defense in the RICO case. Because she's convicted of one crime, she got out from the others. Her testimony can bolster the prosecutor's point that this was Trump's plot, that he had criminal intent, that he, they say, was informed on all of this and went forward to do it. Not the advice of counsel defense that he was just sitting around and lawyers did things or advised him to do things, and that is the way, the direction, right? Was it his intent to do it and it was a bad thing, like I said, or was it someone else's idea and then a lawyer who, yes, in government and other circles you do listen to lawyers up to a point, set it into him? So no one knows whether Powell ultimately will be scorched earth, will be as tough as possible on Donald Trump. I want to be clear with you as we try to understand this. There are scenarios where someone can argue they're telling the truth and get away with sort of a broader version of it. In court, for example, the prosecutor says, well, did it then become clear that he was trying to steal the election? And they say, look, I don't know, I can only tell you this, this, and that. And other people who would give more forthcoming testimony say, well, that was my understanding. Seemed like he wanted to steal the election and he knew exactly what he was asking. We don't know which exact Powell we will get, but we do know all the pressure is on her to fulfill her plea agreement, not to break it. So next we turn to someone who has enforced exactly these kind of agreements in very serious cases, the former head of the SCNY, when we return.
Are you pleading guilty today because you agree that there is a sufficient factual basis, that there are enough facts that support this plea of guilty?
I do.
Trump lawyer and aide Sidney Powell pleading guilty, the first such person to do so in any election case regarding the coup and insurrection activities against Donald Trump. He now faces both that RICO case as well as a cooperating flipped witness. We're joined as promised by former SDNY chief and my former boss, David Kelly. Welcome, David. I mentioned to viewers earlier in the hour, there is a lot going on. This is a huge story, even amidst the Mideast war, the speaker's race, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, all these outlets covering this as this breakthrough moment as well. And so given that we've walked through some of the details tonight, your view as a prosecutor, how you use a witness like this, and specifically how you address something I mentioned or raised in the setup to this segment, that there are times where someone can be technically truthful but not as useful as a cooperating witness.
Well, you know, Ari, when I first was going to come on, I was very excited about the possibility of injecting into our discussion some talk about hip-hop, which I know you always want to do.
I do like that.
And Maya, by mentioning Hamilton, trumped me, so to speak.
Okay.
But if I'm going to look, if it didn't answer your question, I draw right from Hamilton, because in that song, The Room Where It Happened, one of the key lines, it's where the sausage is being made. And this is how you use somebody like Sidney Powell, is tell us what those discussions were, how you were making the sausage. And it really ties into this whole thing about, you know, the attorney-client privilege that you've alluded to, which is, you know, you can't really use that privilege if the advice on which you're relying is either not legal or not reasonable. And when we talk about Chesbrough, when he had this whole thing come out recently about the advice that he was given, the determination has been made that it really wasn't legal at all. It was more political.
Right.
And so that will be some of the discussion that Sidney Powell will talk about in her testimony, presumably. And remember, you know, when there's a comment, I think it came out in the course of Jack Smith's indictment, where there is reference to Sidney Powell as her being nuts, her being crazy. And so when you're talking about the attorney-client privilege, you know, she's coming up with all these theories, but it's certainly not something they could rely on as for the attorney-client privilege, because Trump knew it wasn't reasonable.
When you look at this, do you think she's going to go pretty far because there's plenty of seemingly incriminating stories to tell, or she's going to do the bare minimum to just get her deal done?
I don't think. No, look, first off, she's a lawyer. She wants to, you know, by taking the misdemeanor pleas, it's clear that she wants to remain a lawyer. Whether or not that will happen, it remains to be seen by the states in which she's admitted to the bar. But she didn't want to throw that all down the drain. And I think that she took this on knowing that she had to be truthful, and they're going to wring that towel dry. This is somebody who was in the room, who can set the stage, who can say, you know, what did he say to him and what did he say to her? And this is really important testimony that she has to give.
What do you think of the Trump lawyers' response today, which we mentioned before? And in fairness, I want to note they are arguing that if it's truthful, it will be, quote, favorable to their defense strategy. It's hard to square that with some of what she said in the Jan 6, et cetera, but go ahead.
I saw that. I'm kind of scratching my head. You know, I guess it can only be, going back to the other statements you played by Trump's lawyers, that they're looking to put out based on advice of counsel defense, which it's really tough to do that, particularly when you appreciate the fact that it's nuts. As they said, this is not, the whole scheme. And on top of that, I don't know how much of what Sidney Powell was talking about is really advice of counsel so much as it is advice of somebody who wants to overturn the election, and it's bereft of any sort of real legal advice. So I think they have trying to read the tea leaves on what he's saying that is going to be helpful. All the evidence that we've seen publicly released, I don't see it being helpful to the defense. And frankly, as Maya pointed out, look, I think the prosecutors in this case have really combed through this. They're right on the verge of going to trial. They've had to think this through. And so they wouldn't have signed her up to this deal, which, by the way, I think is a pretty damn good deal for Sidney Powell.
Clearly.
And I don't think they would have given her that gift if they didn't see that she had a big gift to give to them.
I'm running over on time, but if you're Mark Meadows' attorney and your job is just to protect Mark Meadows, what do you tell him tonight?
It's like what you and I talked about a couple of weeks ago when you put all the pictures up. The dominoes are starting to fall, and I think if I'm Mark Meadows, I'm thinking maybe it's time for this domino to tilt.
There you have it. David Kelly, thank you very much, speaking on a case challenge that you know well. When we come back, we actually turn to why Jack Smith's hand may be strengthened as well tonight.
सब है दिया, नाम तेरा लिया, तूने सब है दिया, सारे संसार पर है तेरी नजर, ओ शिव शंकर, ओ शिव शंकर, ओ शिव शंकर, ओ शिव शंकर। जब जब देखूं तुझे मैं मन मेरा खिलता है, देखूं मैं जिधर तू दिखे है उधर, देखूं मैं जिधर तू दिखे है उधर, तूने खुशियों से भर दिया है दिल का नगर, ओ शिव शंकर, ओ शिव शंकर, ओ शिव शंकर, ओ शिव शंकर। ओम नमः शिवाय, ओम नमः शिवाय, ओम नमः शिवाय, ओम नमः शिवाय। बिखरा था टूट के पहले तूने मुझको संवारा है, मेरा भोला साथ खड़ा था मैंने जब भी पुकारा है, ना समझ बेखबर तेरी सब पे नजर, ना समझ बेखबर तेरी सब पे नजर, संग तू है खड़ा तो है कैसा डर, ओ शिव शंकर, ओ शिव शंकर, ओ शिव शंकर, ओ शिव शंकर, ओ शिव शंकर।